In this video, we're going to take a look at practice test number 6, module 1. That is the SAT practice test that's published by the College Board. If you don't know already, the College Board is an organization that does the SAT, and they publish paper practice tests. You can look those up on this website, or there will be a link in the description of this video. When you open that test up, practice test number 6 is going to look like this. And the reading and writing part comes first. We are not going to cover reading and writing. We're only going to cover the math part, which starts on page about 30. I say about because there's directions. The first page of math gives you some formulas and then gives you some directions of how to write your answers. And then on page 32 is where module 1 starts. There is also a module 2, and there'll be a link in this video to find that module 2 explanation. But in this video, we only cover module 1. So let's take a look at module 1. Question 1 says, what value of P is the solution to the given equation? So the given equation is P plus 3 plus 8 is equal to 10. What we need to do there is essentially realize that those parentheses are not doing anything. So that's like P plus 3 plus 8 equals 10. Add 3 and 8 to get 11. You'd get P plus 11 is equal to 10. And then subtract 11 from both sides. That would give you P is equal to -1. And so your final answer is that P is equal to -1. And the solution to the equation is A, -1. Let's take a look at problem number 2. I'll expand it out. The scatter plot shows the relationships between variables X and Y. And it gives us a scatter plot with some points. Which of the following graphs shows the most appropriate model for the data? Well, as you can see, this graph, we start out with a point that's pretty close here. It looks like less than, just above 0, and then just a little bit over 0. And then we come in and it turns up. And as we move towards the right, the increase in values of the Y values starts speeding up. So we look at what options they give. They give a straight line. They give a straight line with positive slope, a straight line with negative slope. Then they give us 2 exponentials where the increase in the line, or the increase in the curve, excuse me, speeds up as you move towards the right. The one that fits the points best is D. C obviously is off these points by a far amount, where D is off the points by a much lower amount. So option D would be the best choice there. So D would be the answer to question number 2. Question number 3 says, what is the positive solution to the given equation? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take k squared minus 53 equals 91, and we're going to add 53 to both sides. When I do that, 91 plus 53 is equal to, excuse me, I didn't hit that in the, I had that in my calculator, 144. Now, this equation technically has 2 solutions. One is at k equals 12. The other is at k equals negative 12. So if you square 12, you get 144, or if you square negative 12, you get 144. The positive solution obviously is 12 because negative 12 is negative. So the answer to number 3 is D, which is 12. Question 4 says during a portion of a flight, a small airplane's cruising speed varied between 150 miles per hour and 170 miles per hour. What is the which inequality best represents this situation where S is the cruising speed in miles per hour during the portion of the flight? So if at smallest, the speed was 150 and at largest, the speed was 170, that means that the cruising speed was always between 150 and 170 during that portion of the flight. So the inequality that works best is the inequality in option D. 150 is less than or equal to S is less than or equal to 170. So D is the correct answer on question 4. Question 5 says an object was launched upward from a platform. The graph shown models the height above ground, y, in meters, of the object x seconds after it was launched. For which of the following intervals of time was the height of the object increasing for the entire interval? So in other words, from what interval is this increasing? All we need to do is notice where the increase starts and where the increase stops. This graph begins increasing when x is 0, and it goes up all the way until the x value hits 2. So the interval of increase is from 0 to 2. When you go from 0 to 4, we have increase and decrease. When we have 2 to 3, that's just decrease. When we have 3 to 4, that's just decrease. So the correct answer there is A. The interval of increase goes from x of 0 to x of 2. Question 6 says how many yards are equivalent to 1,116 inches? 1 yard is equal to 36 inches. There's a couple of different ways to do this. This is a conversion problem. So we have 1,116 inches. One way to convert is to think of multiplying by a fraction, which is the equivalent of 1. And moreover, when it's the equivalent of 1, we're going to put inches in the denominator. Since we want to convert to yards, we put yards in the numerator. Well, if it's the equivalent of 1, we know that 1 yard is equal to 36 inches. So if we do this multiplication, what will happen is the inches labels will get canceled out and we'll be left with a label that is yards. So that's all we do. 1,116 times 1 divided by 36 is 31. So the answer, if we did it that way, would be 31 yards. And the answer is just 31 because it asks for how many yards. Now, another way we can do that is really similar. We can set up equal ratios with an unknown. We already know that 1 yard is equal to 36 inches. And it's asking us how many yards, we'll call it X yards, is equal to 1,116 inches. So we can set up a ratio like that and then cross multiply 36 times X on one side is equal to 1,116 times 1 on the other. Dividing both sides by 36, you get X is equal to 31 once again. So either way, we get 31 yards. You can either set up two ratios that are equal, so we have a proportion problem, or you can do multiplication to convert. In either case, the answer to question 6 is 31. Question 7. The function f represents the total cost in dollars of attending an arcade when X games are played. How many games can be played for a total cost of $58? So the input X is how many games were played, and the output f of X is 58. Or excuse me, is 58 at most. So what we're going to do, we can either set up an inequality or we can just solve this equality. If you want to set up an inequality, that's fine as well. This 58 has to be greater than or equal to 14 plus 4x. But we can set up an equality as well and just solve and use logic. That's what I typically do. So we would subtract 14 from both sides, giving us 44 is equal to 4x. Then dividing both sides by 4, you get x is equal to 11. So how many games can be played for $58? The answer to that is 11 games can be played for $58. So the answer to number 7 is 11. Question 8. For the linear function f, b is constant. When x is 0, f of x is equal to 30. What is the value of b? Now, this is one where if you know, you know. B is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is at the point where b is the y value of the y-intercept. The y-intercept is the point where you plug in x of 0 and you get out a specific y value. So we're at the point 0, 30, which is the y-intercept. That means b has to be 30. And so the answer to number 8 is D. Now, if you didn't know that, then you can set this up in a different way and you just use algebra. So if you like, what you could do is you could say when x is 0, f of x is equal to 30. So 30 is the output when the input is 0. And then you can just solve for b if you'd like as well. So just replace f of x with a 30, replace x with a 0, solve for b. You get that b is equal to 30. So the answer to question 8 is D, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. Question 9. The function p gives the estimated number of marine mammals in a certain area, where t is the number of years since a study began. What is the best interpretation of p of 0 is equal to 1,800 in this context? So if t is the number of years since the study began, and p gives the estimated number of marine mammals, well, this means that at year 0, meaning when the study began, there was 1,880 mammals, marine mammals. And therefore, we're looking at answer B there. The estimated number of marine mammals in the area was 1,800 when the study began. So B is the correct answer to question number 9. Question 10. A manager is responsible for ordering supplies for a shaved ice shop. The shop's inventory starts with 4,500 paper cups, and the manager estimates that 70 of these paper cups are used each day. Based on this estimate, in how many days will the supply of paper cups reach 1,700? So if we start with 4,500 paper cups, and if we're losing 70 each day, I can create an equation that says the number of cups is going to be equal to 4,500 minus 70D. And then it says, in how many days will the supply of paper cups reach 1,700? So we start with 1,700 we start with 4,500. We're wanting to know when we get to 1,700. So type in 1,700 in for the number of cups and solve. Taking 4,500, we'd have to subtract 4,500 from both sides. You can also add 70D to both sides if you want your number of days to be on the left. I will subtract 4,500 from both sides, giving me negative 2,800 is equal to negative 70 times D. Dividing both sides by negative 70 gives me 40 is equal to D. So the number of days it takes to reach 1,700 cups is 40 days. And therefore, the answer to question 10 is B, 40. So B is the answer to question 10. Question 11. For which of the following tables are all of the values of X and their corresponding values of Y solutions to the given inequality? What we're going to do is we're going to end up plugging in values of X and Y into this inequality and seeing whether we get a true statement or not. So we're going to have to do that for all of these or until we hit true for every set of values in the table. Now it turns out that we have y greater than 4x plus 8. We're going to plug in 219, 430, 641. I'll do that pretty quickly. Remember here, we're going to plug in the y values into the y, the x values into the x. So we have y greater than 4x plus 8. So for part A, the three that we're going to check are 19 in for y, 2 in for x, that's one I'm going to check, and then 30 in for y and 4 in for x. And then lastly, 41 in for y and 6 in for x. And then I'll calculate each one of those. So let's start with the one on the left. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 8 is 16. So I get 19 greater than 16. That's a true statement, so I'm good to go. The one in the middle, we have 30 on the left greater than 4 times 4, which is 16 plus 8, 24 on the right. So we're good to go. For the last one, we have 41 is greater than 4 times 6 plus 8, which is 32. That's good to go. Since all are true, this is for part A, then we know that the table works. So table for part A is the one that works. Now you can do this for every single other table as well. You can do it for B, you can do it for C, and you can do it for D. You're going to see that at least one of these inequalities is going to be off. So I could stop right here. We know table A is the one that is the correct answer for question 11. If I were taking a test and had short time, I'd stop right there and keep going. But if I did have time, I might check that the other ones give me some false statement. So let's go ahead and check for part B. B has 2, 8, 4, 16, 6, 24. So what we would do for B is we would set up the 2, 8. So we have, again, into this inequality, y greater than 4x plus 8. So we go 8 greater than 4 times 2 plus 8. That's the first inequality. The second inequality would be off of 416. So that's 16 in for y, 4 in for x. And then the last inequality would be 624. So that's what we have. Now in this first one, obviously what we're going to get is 8 greater than 16. That's in the first. In the second, we're going to get 16 greater than 24. And in the third, we end up getting 24 greater than 32. So these are actually all false. So while table B works, nothing on table, while table A works, nothing on table B works. So that's not a correct solution. Now we can do this with table C and table D as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And in fact, all we really need to do is once we get one that doesn't work, we can stop. So if I really wanted to check table C and table D, let's plug in 213. That would be 13 in for the Y value. And then 2 in for the X value. And on both of those, what we get is 13 is greater than 16. That's obviously false. So neither table C nor table D works either. And I'm trying to give you a lot of different ways to look at this. Basically, all we need is one of these inequalities not to work, and then the whole table gets thrown out. I was overly thorough on table B. I'm just checking one of the options on table C and one of the options on table D. Both of those options can be checked at the same time because both of those points are in C and D. The only way a table works is if all of the corresponding pairs work, and A is the only scenario that happens. So the answer to question 11, once again, is table A. A is the answer to 11. Twelve asks, which expression is equivalent to x squared plus 11, all in parentheses, squared, plus the quantity x minus 5 times the quantity x plus 5. And then my options are all expanded out polynomials. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to expand out the polynomial and see what happens when it's all multiplied out and after we've combined like terms. Now, in order to do that, x squared plus 11 needs to be written as x squared plus 11 times another copy of x squared plus 11. If we do that, then we can see this is binomial multiplication. X squared times x squared is x raised to the fourth power. X squared times 11 is 11x squared. 11 times x squared is another copy of 11x squared. And then 11 times 11 is 121. So that's what I get out when I expand this first part out. Now we have plus, and I have to expand this second part out. X times x is x squared. X times 5 is a positive 5x. Negative 5 times x is negative 5x. And then negative 5 times positive 5 is a negative 25. At this stage, we can just combine like terms. There's only one x to the fourth term. When you look at the x squared terms, we have 11 plus 11 plus an x squared. So an x squared, 3x squared terms, which have coefficients of 11, 11, and 1. And so that combines to give me 23 copies of x squared, or 23x squared. If you look at the terms with x's raised to the first power, there's 5x and a minus 5x. Those cancel each other out. So we get no x term. And then with the constant numbers, 121 minus 25 gives a 96. So my final expression simplifies to x to the fourth plus 23x squared plus 96. And that is option B. So problem 12, the solution is option B, x to the fourth plus 23x squared plus 96. Problem 13. The function h is defined by h of x is equal to 8 divided by 5x plus 6, where the 5x plus 6 is all in the denominator. What is the value of h of 2? In this problem, we simply need to plug in 2 for the x value and compute what that will be. When we do that, we replace the x with the number 2, And make sure that you simplify the denominator to 16 before you take the 8. Some people mistakenly will take 8 divided by 5 and then times 2, and that's not the same thing, or 8 divided by 10. No, we're taking 8 divided by the entire denominator, which is 16. Now, there's a couple of different valid ways that we can write this. 8 over 16 as a reduced fraction is 1/2. And that's one appropriate way to write your answer. Another appropriate way you could write your answer is to write that as a decimal, which is 0.5. So 1/2 or 0.5 are both appropriate ways that you could write the answer to question 13. The reason I'm phrasing it as appropriate ways is because remember on page 31 of the practice test, it showed how to write the answers. And it said if your answer is a fraction, as long as it's not over 5 characters, then we can write that fraction. That's fine. Don't write a mixed number. It says write a mixed number or decimal if you have a mixed number. But you could also have written that as a decimal because, again, it's not over 5 characters as a decimal. So whether it's a fraction or a decimal, you just need to stay under 5 characters and you're good. So either way, whether you write the answer as 0.5 or 1/2 is appropriate to the way you'd answer a question on this practice test. So that's 13. 13 has an answer of 1/2, or you could write it as 0.5. Question 14. The figure shows the lengths in inches of two sides of a right triangle. What is the area of the triangle in square inches? So when we have a right triangle, the legs of the right triangle form the base and the height of the triangle as well, since they hit at a 90-degree angle. And so the area of a triangle is 1/2 times base times height. The area here is equal to 1/2. The base was we'll call it the 5. The base is the 5. The height is the 3. You could have also flipped the triangle and had the same numbers. And what you end up with is a 7.5, or you could have written this also as a 15/2. Either way, that's fine. Again, from the same reasoning as question 13, decimals under 5 and fractions under 5 are perfectly fine. When I say under 5, I don't mean numerically. I just mean how many keystrokes you're making. So we're saying 5 characters for positive. So how many keystrokes you're making, or over 5 characters for positive. This was obviously a positive number. So 7.5 or 15/2 both work because they both fit in to how this practice test wants the responses. As far as labels goes, this would be in square inches. Since each side is length in inches, then when I take a side times a side, I'm getting inches times inches. So in other words, 5 inches times 3 inches is 15 square inches, or 15/2, excuse me, square inches, or 7.5 square inches. So that's what it's asking us to do. What is the area of the triangle in square inches? You can either write the answer as 7.5 or 15/2. That is question 14. Question 15. The graph models the number of active projects a company was working on X months after the end of November 2012, where X is between 0 and 6. According to the model, what is the predicted number of active projects the company was working on at the end of 2012? So remember, this X is standing for months after the end of November 2012. So if we're looking at the end of November 2012, that's an X value of 0. So the X value is 0. But that's not how many projects there is. The Y value is the number of projects. So when we look at this graph, it looks like we're going through the point 0, 5. That means that when we were in November of 2012, this company had 5 projects. So the answer is B, 5. So B is the answer to question 15. 5 projects at the end of 2012. Question 16. The relationship between two variables, x and y, is linear. For every increase in the value of x by 1, the value of y increases by 8. When the value of x is 2, the value of y is 18. Which equation represents this relationship? Now, the nice thing is all of these equations are in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. And the slope there is m, is always change in y divided by change in x. I'll write the change in. Some people would write delta or y2 minus y1, but for the purposes of this question, change in y over change in x. This says for every increase in the value of x by 1, so every change of increase by 1, that's a positive 1, the value of y increases by 8. So what we get there is that we have slope of 8. Now at this point, the only valid option is C, which is y equals 8x plus 2. So the only valid option is C. We kind of know that that's going to be what we're forced into. But let's finish this problem by finding the value of B, just so that we know we're all good with this. This says when the value of x is 2, the value of y is 18. So when x is 2, y is equal to 18. That gives me a point that I can plug in, and I know that's going to give me a true statement. So we end up with 18 is equal to 16 plus b. Subtracting 16 from both sides gives me a b of 2. And now we know that in slope-intercept form, our line is y is equal to 8x plus 2. And C is the correct answer. 8x plus 2 is the solution for problem 16. So question 16 has answer of C, which is y equals 8x plus 2. Question 17. The given equation relates the positive numbers p, n, and c. Which equation correctly expresses c in terms of p and n? In other words, we want to figure out how to rewrite this equation so that we get c equals on the left-hand side, or c on its own on one side. So in order to do that, what we would do is I'd start with this equation, and then I distribute the n into both the 19 and the negative c. We'd get 19 times n minus n times c on the right-hand side. A couple ways I can solve this. One way, I will add nc to both sides. We get p plus nc on the left. And then when I add n times c on the right, then I'm only left with 19n. Subtracting p from both sides would give me nc is equal to 19n minus p. And then we could divide both sides by n to isolate the c. So we get the fraction 19n minus p divided by n. Now, in this case, 19n and then p over 19n can be divided by n. P over n can be divided by n. So what I will rewrite this as c equals 19n divided by n is just 19. And then p over n can't be simplified. So that's going to be a minus p over n. And the answer, therefore, is D. C is equal to 19 minus P over N. So that's option D. So the answer to question 17 is option D. Question 18. Which of the following is a solution to the given equation? So let me read that again. Which of the following is a solution to the given equation? And then it asks us these four options. Now, if you want to, what you could do is you could plug in each of those numerical values into W and see what you get in each case. If you get a true statement, so if you get 0, then you get 0, that's fine. And you get an actual solution. If you don't get 0 on the left, then you know it's not a solution. So in each of these cases, we can plug in and see what we end up with. Another way to do this problem is to use the quadratic formula. Since this is a quadratic equation, we can use the quadratic formula, which says that the answer to this equation, as long as I have a quadratic equaling 0, and the quadratic looks like a times my variable squared plus b times my variable plus c, set equal to 0, I know that the answers are going to be opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, in this case, the b is the coefficient of the w, so that's 12. So in this case, we'd be getting a negative 12 plus or minus the square root of, inside we get 12 squared, because our b is still 12, minus 4 times a. A is the coefficient of the w squared, so that's a 1, times c. C is the constant number, that's a negative 40, all over 2 times a, that's 2 times 1. And then we just simplify that. Negative 12 plus or minus the square root. And then inside that square root, 12 squared is 144. 4 times 40 is 160. So we end up getting square root of 304 divided by 2. 304 is is 16 times 19. That's the best way to do it. So you can do it other ways. I was thinking about doing it other ways. I'll do 16 times 19. So 16 times 19. Square root of 16 is 4. So we end up with negative 12 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 19 does not simplify, all divided by 2. And so last simplification, negative 12 over 2 is a negative 6. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And so our two answers are negative 6 plus 2 root 19, negative 6 minus 2 root 19. So I go and look at my answers. The only option that I get for one of those two answers is negative 6 plus 2 root 19. The negative 6 minus 2 root 19 is not up there. Therefore, option D is the answer to 18. So the answer to question 18 is option D. Question 19. The table shown summarizes the number of employees at each of the 17 restaurants, in a town. So at each of the 17 restaurants in the town, we have the number of employees. So there are between 2 and 7 employees at 2 restaurants. There are between 8 and 13 employees at 4 restaurants. There are between 14 and 19 employees at 2 restaurants, between 20 and 25 employees at 7 restaurants, and between 26 and 31 employees at 2 restaurants. Which of the following could be the median number of employees for the restaurants in this town? Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a hack. We're going to find the median in this scenario. And the way I'm going to think about this is I'm going to think about this as taking, since there's between 2 and 7, just think of all of the values between 2 and 7, okay? And we'll use one value to represent that. For right now, let's just use the value of 2 to represent that. 2 employees at 2 restaurants. Then we could use the minimum value to represent our second. So 8 happens 4 times. Then we can use 14 to represent. Now, I'm choosing the minimum value, but most people would use the middle value. So 14 would happen twice. 20 could happen 7 times. So I'm using a representative number for each set. And then 26 could happen twice. So if I'm looking at this set and using a representative number, 2 happens twice, 8 happens 4 times, 14 happens twice, 20 happens 7 times, 26 happens twice. I'm going to find the middle number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. And then I'll do the same thing again, take away 4. Take away 4 numbers from top and bottom. Then take away 2 from the top and the bottom. And we see that our middle number is 20. You can think about taking away or canceling out. You can also do this by the numbers here. See these 2 down here and the 2 up top, those will cancel out. Then we're left with 15 in the middle. And if I go 7 in this direction, 7 in the other direction, I'm at 20. Now, technically, I use 20 as a representative number for this group that had between 20 and 25. So any number that's somewhere above or equal to 20 and below or equal to 25 would have been a valid number. We don't know which number it is because we don't know the raw data. Therefore, since we're looking for a number between 20 and 25 to give me my median, that means D is the correct answer. D, which is 21, could be the median. 15 is too small, 9 is too small, 2 is too small, because I know my median has to be between 20 and 25. Now, I listed things out long and counted, but you can also, again, use just the numerical values here. And when I listed things out, I used the small number, but you could have used a middle number. You could have used the high number. You could have used whatever you like. Question 20. What is the y-coordinate of the y-intercept of the graph 3x over 7 is equal to negative 5y over 9 plus 21 in the xy plane? In order to figure out the y-intercept, what we need to do is we need to plug in 0 for x. And therefore, we're going to get 3 times 0, all divided by 7, is equal to negative 5/9, or 5y over 9. I'm going to call that 5/9 y because that's the same thing, plus 21. So we end up with 0 is equal to negative 5/9 times y plus 21. If I add 5/9 y to both sides, I get 5/9 times y is equal to 21. And now I can do one of two things. I can either divide both sides by 5/9. If you do that and you're typing it into your calculator, make sure you put the 5/9 in parentheses. Or you could multiply both sides by 9 over 5, 9/5. Either way is perfectly fine. When you do that, you end up with y equals 37.8. And again, if you wanted to write that as a fraction, what you'd have to do is you'd have to write that as 189 over 5. That's less than 5 characters. So both of those options are valid. The y value of the y-intercept is 37.8 or 189 over 5. Both of those options are fine. That's the y value of the y-intercept of the graph we were looking at. Now, there are other ways to do this. You could have graphed this using a graphing calculator. That's another option, and find the y-intercept that way. I'm using algebraic techniques primarily. Question 21. The graph of y equals 2x squared plus bx plus c is shown, where b and c are constants. what is the value of B times C? So what we need to do is we need to figure out what's going on here and figure out the value of B, the value of C, and then multiply them together. Now, the way I would do this, since this is a quadratic equation pointing up, is I would use the vertex to find the value of B and the value of C. Now, vertex has X value, which is equal to opposite of B divided by 2A, where B is the coefficient of X, which is the same B we have here, and A is the coefficient of X squared, which is 2. Notice that what this means, since we can clearly see the vertex has X value of -1 and Y value of 8, the vertex is the lowest point on this graph at -1, 8. That means that the value of X can be replaced with a -1. We know that A is 2 in this scenario. And this allows me to solve for B. We end up with multiplying both sides by 4. 2 times 2 is 4. Multiply both sides by 4, you would end up with -4 is equal to negative B, which means B is equal to 4. So that's how we find the B value. How do I find the C? Well, we can see that the vertex happens at -1, -8. So if you wanted to plug in -8 for Y, -1 for X, you can now solve for C. But there's actually an easier point to plug in if I want to find C. If I want to find C, I just notice that my graph goes through the point 0, -6. So if I wanted to find C, that's the easier way. We take my original equation, which was Y is equal to 2X squared plus, I can either use BX, or now that I know B is 4, I'll just type in 4X plus C. Since I know it goes through the point 0, -6, I can plug in 0 in for X and figure out that C is equal to -6. So I figured out that B was 4 and C was -6 by using the fact that the vertex has X value of opposite of B over 2A, and then noticing that the y-intercept of this graph was 0, -6. Once again, 0, -6 is not the only option you could plug in. You technically could have plugged in -2, -6. You could have also, it looks like it goes through the point 1, 0, so you could have plugged in 1, 0, or -3, 0, or you could have plugged in the vertex itself of -1, -8. And let's just go through the option where you plug in -1 in for the X and -8 in for the Y. We're going to end up with -8 is equal to, this is going to be 2 minus 4 plus C. 2 minus 4 is a -2. And then I'd add 2 to both sides, giving me a C value of -6 again. So that also gives me a C value of -6, but it just takes a couple more steps. Multiplying by 0 is nice. So that's why I like to plug in 0 when I can, when I have that option. Then I lose a step and C is -6. So technically you can plug in any point. I plugged in 0, -6. Now we're almost done. It says, what is the value of B times C? Well, all we have to do is type in B times C, which now we know is 4 times -6. And that is equal to -24. Therefore, the answer to this question is -24. So that's the answer to question -21, or to question 21. -24 is the answer to question 21. Question 22. In 2008, Xena earned 14% more than in 2007. And in 2009, Xena earned 4% more than 2008. If Xena earned Y times as much in 2009 as in 2007, what is the value of Y? So Y times as much. Now, I'm going to set X up as equal to her earnings in 2007. Okay. And then what going to happen is her 2008 earnings, I'll call that Y, is going to be 14% more. And then 2009 earnings, I'll call that Z. That's 4% more than 2008. So what we have here is an equation that says Y, the earnings in 2008, is 14% more than earnings in 2007. So 14% more is 114% of the original. And the same is true with 4% more. 4% more is 104% of whatever the original number. So Y is equal to 114%. As a decimal, that's 1.14, times the original value of X, that is their earnings in 2007. And Z is equal to 104% of the earnings in 2008, which is Y. So notice what's going to happen, that in order to get Z as earnings in 2009 compared to the earnings in 2007, what we would do is we'd take 1.04 and we'd replace this Y with a 1.14x. So Y gets replaced with a 1.14, and that's what I need to multiply. 1.04 times 1.14 becomes 1.1856x. Now I screwed this up. It should have said Y times as much. They used Y for how many times as much. So let me use a different letter for Y instead. I'll use T as the earnings. I should have used a different letter in there. T is the earnings, same idea. So how many times, if Xena earned Y times as much in 2009 as in 2007, So if we want to compare the 2009 to 2007 number, we're using this equation. Y times as much, well, that's 1.1856 times as much. So the answer is 1.1856. And therefore, the answer to this question is D, 1.1856. Question 23. Circle A shown is defined by the equation x plus 2 quantity squared plus y squared is equal to 9. Circle B is not shown, but circle B is the result of shifting circle A down 6 units and increasing the radius so that the radius of circle B is 2 times the radius of circle A. What is the equation that defines circle B? So we end up having this equation and we want to shift it and then mess with the radius. Now 9 is not the radius. 9 is the radius squared. So let me just write this. That's the radius squared. Instead of writing 9, I'm going to translate that into 3 squared. That's going to be important, radius squared. And you can see that on the picture. We have radius of 3, and it's centered at the point -2, 0. Now, if we want to shift down 6 units, that's going to affect the y value. And what we're going to do is we're going to take x plus 2 quantity squared plus, instead of y, shift it down by 6 units, replaces the y with a y plus 6. Be careful about that. That's a y plus 6. Because our new center is going to be -2, -6. So in order to combat a negative, a shift down, go y plus 6. Now, we're going to increase the radius so that the radius of this new circle is 2 times the radius of the old circle. Well, if the radius of the old circle were 3, then 2 times that would be 6. You can either write this as 3 times 2, or you can write it as 6. Either way is fine. But I want to point something out. Our options on the right-hand side don't say 36, they say 4 times 9. The reason they do is because of this idea. So we get x plus 2 squared plus y plus 6 squared is equal to, I could have written this as 36, but I'm going to keep it as 2 squared, which is 4, times 3 squared, which is 9. So 4 times 9. And that tells me that the answer to 23 is option A. Quantity x plus 2 squared plus the quantity y plus 6 squared is equal to 4 times 9. And if there are ever any doubts, then you can just figure out some points on a circle and see if they plug in and give you a true statement. But a shift down is doing a plus to our y. A shift to the left is doing a plus to our x. Question 24. Right triangle ABC is shown. What is the value of tangent of A. So this is a 30-degree angle. If this right triangle, so we have this right triangle. This is a right triangle. We know that the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees, and therefore our missing angle needs to be 60 degrees, because what's going to happen is we're going to get the right angle, which is 90, plus the angle that was given, which is 30, and then plus the angle at A. All three angles have to add up on any triangle to 180 degrees. So that means A has to be 60 degrees. So we're getting a 30, 60, 30, 60, 90 right triangle with hypotenuse of 54. There's a number of ways we can solve this, but in the practice test, it gave us this reference guide. In that reference guide, it said the sum of measures of degrees of triangle is 180. So we already used that. But now we can see also it gives us this special right triangle. So the easiest way to find the sides of this triangle is just to go by this special right triangle, where the hypotenuse is 2x. The length of the side opposite of 30 is going to be just x. And the length of the side opposite of 60 degrees is going to be x times root 3. So let's look at what that means for our triangle. So hypotenuse, which is 54, has to be 2x. Length of the side opposite of the 30 has to be the x. And the length of the side that is over here has to be square root of 3 times x. Okay, so that is opposite the 60-degree angle. So there, since 2x is equal to 54, that means x has to be 27. And that means this other side is square root of 3 times 27. So let me draw that a little bit nicer than writing on here. I'll actually draw the picture and put that up in this problem. So here we go. My triangle looks a little bit different just because of the sizes, but none of these triangles are drawn to scale anyways. That's what it says. We can see that, like I said, 2x has to be 54 because of the special right triangle. And that forces x to be 27, and that x is going to be the opposite side of 30, or angle B, which is 30 degrees. And the side opposite of A is going to have to be x times square root of 3, or square root of 3 times x, which in this case, since x is 27, has to be 27 times root 3. Now, the question is asking for tangent of A. And what we should do anytime we're thinking tangents and right triangles, or sine and right triangle, or cosine and right triangle, I always remember the mnemonic SOHCAHTOA, which says the sine is the opposite side over the hypotenuse, the cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and the tangent is the opposite over adjacent. So the tangent of angle A, let me use capital A so we're consistent, is equal to the fraction where we take the opposite side and divide it by the hypotenuse. So I look at my triangle A, the side opposite of A has length 27 times root 3. Now, I'm sorry, opposite over adjacent. I misspoke there. I don't know why I said that. I looked at sine, I think. Sorry, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. So opposite of angle A is the side with length 27 times root 3. The side adjacent to angle A is length 27. The hypotenuse is also, but we're talking about the leg adjacent to A. So we get 27 root 3 divided by 27. So 27 root 3 divided by 27. And canceling out the 27s gives me the square root of 3. Therefore, the correct answer for problem 24 is option C, which is the square root of 3. So square root of 3 is the correct answer for option C. Now, there is another way you could have figured that out too. If you know that the angle is 60 degrees, you could have also, at this stage, said, I know that angle A is 60 degrees, so I could have just input 60 degrees into the tangent function of my calculator, making sure that the calculator is in degree mode and not radian mode. And you would get that the tangent of 60 is equal to, well, approximately 1.73205, et cetera, which if you were clever, you could figure out that that's the same thing as square root of 3. So the tangent of 60, I should say approximately because this middle number has been rounded, but that's square root of 3. Square root of 3. Tangent of 60 is exactly square root of 3. This decimal rounded is approximately square root of 3. So that's another way you could have done it as well. So could have done it through right triangles. SOHCAHTOA, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Or you could have done it using the fact of tangent of 60 is square root of 3. Problem 25. At the time that an article was first featured on the homepage of a news website, there were 40 comments on the article. An exponential model estimates that at the end of each hour after the article was first featured on the homepage, the number of comments on the article has increased by 190% of the number of comments on the article at the end of the previous hour. Which of the following equations best represents this model where C is the estimated number of comments and T is how many hours after the article was first featured on the homepage? Assume that T is less than or equal to 4. So the key there is noticing that we're talking about an increase by 190%. That means 100% plus 190% or 290% of the previous value. And each hour we're getting a multiplication by 290%. So the number of comments is going to start at 40 and then it's going to get multiplied by 2.90 for every hour, and T stands for hours. So repeated multiplication we can write as 2.90 raised to the Tth power. So that's how the model is going to look. That means the answer to question 25 is D. C equals 40 times 2.9 raised to the T power. Question 26 gives us a table. It says the table shows 3 values for x and their corresponding values of g of x, where g of x is equal to f of x divided by x plus 3. And f is a linear function. What is the y-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x in the xy plane? So we have 3 points, and we have g of x equals f of x divided by x plus 3. And I know f of x is a linear function. That means I can write f of x as equal to mx plus b. That's the slope-intercept form of a linear function. And that also means that g of x is equal to the fraction, whatever mx plus b is, divided by x plus 3. And we have a few points to plug in. So when x is negative 27, g of x is 3. When x is negative 9, g of x is 0. When x is 21, g of x is 5. So we can actually plug some of those points in. I will go ahead and plug those points in. Let me write, I'll write them as points first before I plug them in. Negative 27, 3. I'll plug in that point first. When I do that, I get an output of 3 when my x is 27. So m times, no, negative 27, excuse me. When my x is negative 27, so I get that. And if we rewrite that, negative 27 plus 3 is a negative 24. So I will rewrite that in the denominator there. I'll multiply both sides by negative 24 just to make it a linear equation and get negative 72 is equal to negative 27 times m plus b. Now I can do that for another point as well. I might as well do it for negative 9, 0. That's the next point. So for negative 9, 0. So negative 9, 0. The output of 0 happens when the input is negative 9. We get m times negative 9 plus b divided by, not going to matter that much to be honest, but we get negative 9 plus 3. That becomes a negative 6. Notice that when I multiply both sides by negative 6, I end up with the equation that says 0 is equal to negative 9m plus b. Now, there's another point that we can use, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use these two equations to find my m and to find my b. So now I have the following. I have negative 72 is equal to negative 27m plus b, and I have 0 is equal to negative 9m plus b. Now I need to multiply either the top equation or the bottom equation by a -1 in order to make the b's cancel out when I combine the two equations. So I'm going to multiply the bottom equation by a -1. If I do that, I get 9m minus b. And then I can add these two equations up. When I add these two equations up, I end up with negative 72 is equal to negative 18 times m. So now I can divide both sides by a negative 18. And when I do that, I figure out that m is equal to 4. So the slope is 4. M is 4. And since m is equal to 4, I can plug that back up into one of these two equations, or one of these two equations, and find the b. 0 equals negative 9 times m plus b is probably the easiest one to plug it into. 0 is equal to negative 9m plus b. Now that I know that m is 4, I replace the m with the number 4, and that gives me 0 equals negative 36 plus b, or b is 36. So now I know what my f of x looks like. My f of x, if I go back up, is 4x plus 36. Again, I got the 4 from the m and the 36 from the b. So it's 4x plus 36. We can actually confirm that by plugging in 21 in for x and seeing what it gives out, or doing all of our points into this large equation. So if you wanted to plug in 21, you do 4 times 21 plus 36, and then divide by 7. 4 times 21 plus 36. Divide by, oh, I'm sorry, what do we got plug in? 21, I'm sorry. Divide by 24. And see that, in fact, you do get a 5. I misspoke there. I said 4 times 21 plus 36. That gives you 120. Divided by 21 plus 3, that's 24. So you'd get, when you plug in an x of 21, you'd end up with a y of 5, or g of x of 5. So that confirms that we got the right g of x, which means we got the right f of x. Now it says, what is the y-intercept of the graph y equals f of x? So the graph y equals f of x, this is already in slope-intercept form, and therefore we should know that the y-intercept is the point 0, 36. And that's obviously answer A. So the answer to question 26 is A, which is the point 0, 36. That's the y-intercept of y equals f of x. Question 27. In right angle ABC, angle C is the right angle, and BC is 162. Point D on side AB is connected by line segment with point E on side AC, such that line segment DE is parallel to the side BC, and CE is equal to 2 times AE. what is the length of line segment DE? Now, this is a lot of words right here to just put together in your mind. You almost certainly have to draw a picture to solve this problem. So let me do that, and I'm going to just clip that in right here. So here's the drawing that I've pasted in here. We have ABC, which is a right triangle with right angle C. BC is length 162. Point D is on side AB. So D is somewhere in here. E is on side AC. And we know that DE, so this line here, is parallel to this line BC. So this is the picture that we get. Now, the important thing here is that if you notice that angle A is the same for both right triangles, and if BC and DE are parallel, that means E is also a right angle on the triangle AED. So that means angle D is the same as angle B, D meaning this smaller triangle. Angle C is the same as measure angle E on this right triangle. Angle A is obviously the same as angle A. So these two triangles are similar, which means that their side lengths need to be proportional. And if side length BC is 162, we know that AE times 2 is equal to CE. So let me write that down. Let's pretend that we called length AE X. Then length CE is going to be 2X. And so therefore, if I go from A to E and then to C, length AC is 3X. So AC is 3X. And that means that in this right triangle, all of the sides of the bigger triangle are going to be 3 times the side length of my smaller triangle. Hopefully that makes sense. So this means that BC is going to be 3 times as big as DE. So if I want to figure out how long DE is, all I have to do is to divide side length BC by 3. And we already know that that's 162. So 162 is equal to 3 times DE. So dividing both sides by 3 gives me 54. So 54 has to be the side length of D to E. And that's it. So the question is asking us, what is the length of line segment DE? The length of line segment DE is 54. So 54 is the answer to question 27. This concludes Module 1 of practice test number 6. Module 2 will also have a video out on how to do the problems in Module 2. That can be found in the link in the description of this video. But that's the end of Module 1 of practice test number 6.